The storm came without warning. One moment the Montana sky was a dull gray, heavy but quiet. The next, it turned violent. Wind tore across the open land like it had something to prove, dragging snow with it in thick, blinding sheets that erased the horizon in seconds. Out here, storms didn't just pass through, they swallowed everything. Ethan Cole tightened his grip on the reins as his horse fought against the wind, each step slower than the last. He should have turned back earlier. He knew that. But when you lived alone on a ranch miles from anything resembling a town, you learned to finish what you started, even when the land reminded you how small you really were. "Easy," he muttered, leaning forward slightly as the horse pushed on. The path was gone now, buried under fresh snow that shifted with every gust. Direction meant nothing. Instinct was all that remained. And then, something moved. Ethan's eyes narrowed through the storm, his body tensing instantly. Movement out here, in weather like this, meant one of two things: trouble, or someone in worse shape than him. He slowed the horse slightly, scanning the white chaos ahead. There, again, a dark shape against the snow, too still to be an animal, too small to be anything else. "Damn it," he breathed under his breath. He didn't think, didn't weigh the risk. He turned the horse toward it. The closer he got, the clearer it became. A woman, half buried in snow, her coat covered in ice, her body barely visible beneath the drift. She wasn't moving. Ethan jumped down before the horse fully stopped, boots sinking deep into the snow as the wind nearly knocked him sideways. He forced himself forward, dropping to one knee beside her. "Hey!" he called, his voice barely carrying over the storm. No response. He brushed snow away from her face quickly, revealing pale skin and closed eyes. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse, weak, but there. "You picked the worst night for a walk," he muttered. There was no time to waste. He slipped one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her legs, lifting her carefully despite the weight of soaked fabric and ice. She didn't react, not even a flinch. That worried him more than anything. He carried her back to the horse, muscles straining against the wind, and managed to get her across the saddle before climbing up behind her. "Hold on," he said, though she couldn't hear him. Then he turned the horse toward home. The ride back felt longer than it should have. The storm grew worse, if that was even possible. Snow cut against his face like needles, his visibility reduced to almost nothing. But he didn't stop. Couldn't. Not now. Not with her barely breathing in front of him. Time blurred. Minutes felt like hours. But eventually, through the white chaos, a shape appeared. His ranch. Small. Solid. A dark outline against the storm. Relief hit him hard enough to make him exhale sharply. "Almost there," he muttered. He pushed the horse forward, guiding it toward the barn first. Getting her inside mattered more than anything else. Once under the shelter, the wind dropped just enough to think clearly again. Ethan slid down quickly, catching her before she slipped from the saddle. She was colder than before, too cold. He carried her inside the house without hesitation, kicking the door shut behind him as the storm roared outside. The warmth hit immediately, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. He laid her carefully near the fire, moving quickly but deliberately. "Stay with me," he said under his breath as he grabbed blankets, piling them over her. Her clothes were soaked, frozen. He knew what that meant. He hesitated for half a second, just enough to acknowledge the line he was about to cross. Then he moved. There was no choice. He worked quickly, carefully, removing the frozen outer layers, replacing them with dry cloth, and wrapping her tightly in blankets. His movements were steady, not rushed, not careless, focused. This wasn't about anything but survival. He added more wood to the fire, flames rising higher, heat spreading through the small room. Then he returned to her side, kneeling beside her again. Her breathing was shallow, too shallow. "Come on," he muttered, rubbing her hands gently between his own, trying to bring warmth back into her skin. Minutes passed. Nothing. Then, a faint movement. Her fingers twitched slightly. Ethan leaned closer. "Yeah, that's it," he said quietly. Her lips parted slightly, a weak breath escaping. Not words, not yet, but it was something. Relief settled into his chest, but he didn't let it slow him down. He stayed there, watching, waiting, making sure she didn't slip back into whatever darkness she had been in. Time stretched again, but differently this time. Slower, quieter. The storm outside still raged, but inside, there was only the fire, the warmth, and the fragile line between life and loss. Eventually, her eyes fluttered. Barely. Then again. Ethan leaned back slightly, giving her space as she slowly came. Back. Confusion filled her expression first, then awareness, then fear. She tried to move, her body tensing instinctively, but the blankets held her in place. "Easy," Ethan said quickly, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "You're safe." Her eyes locked onto his, searching, sharp despite her condition. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough and broken. "My place," he replied. "Found you out there. Storm would have taken you." She blinked slowly, trying to process. Her breathing steadied slightly, though tension remained in her body. "I didn't," she started, then stopped, her strength failing her mid-sentence. "Don't worry about it now," Ethan said. "Just rest." She didn't argue, couldn't. Her eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling her under. But this time, her breathing stayed steady, alive. Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning back against the wall as the adrenaline began to fade. He ran a hand through his hair, glancing toward the door as the storm continued to hammer against it. "You're lucky," he muttered quietly, more to himself than to her. But as he looked back at her, something told him this wasn't just luck. Something about the way she had held herself, even unconscious, even broken by the storm, felt different. Not fragile, not lost, just caught in the wrong moment. He shook the thought away. It didn't matter, not yet. What mattered was that she was alive. The fire crackled softly, the storm slowly beginning to lose its edge as night settled fully over the land. Inside the small ranch house, two strangers shared a silence that hadn't existed hours before, and one who had pulled her back without knowing who she was or what her presence would change. The fire crackled softly as the storm outside began to lose some of its fury, though the wind still howled against the walls like it wasn't ready to let go just yet. Ethan remained where he was for a while, watching her carefully, making sure her breathing stayed steady. He had seen storms take people before, quick, silent, unforgiving. The fact that she was still here, still breathing, meant something, even if he didn't yet know what. Hours passed slowly, the kind of slow that came with exhaustion and uncertainty. At some point, Ethan must have drifted, his head leaning back against the wall, eyes closing just long enough for rest to take hold. When he woke, it was quiet, too quiet. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a heavy stillness that only came after something violent had passed. The fire had burned low, casting a soft orange glow across the room. And she was awake, sitting up. Ethan straightened instantly, his senses snapping back into place. She was leaning slightly against the wall, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her, her eyes focused on him. Not afraid this time, not exactly, but alert, measuring. "You shouldn't be sitting up yet," Ethan said, pushing himself to his feet. Her gaze didn't waver. "And you shouldn't fall asleep while someone you don't know is in your house," she replied. Her voice was stronger now, still rough, but steady. That caught him off guard, just slightly. "Fair point," he admitted. A brief silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind that came when two people were trying to understand each other without saying too much, too soon. "Storm pass?" she asked. Ethan nodded once. "For now." She glanced toward the window, where faint light from the early morning pushed through. "Good," she said quietly. He studied her for a moment. "You remember what happened?" he asked. She hesitated, just for a second, then nodded slowly. "Enough," she said. "Horse went down, couldn't get it back up. After that," she trailed off, her expression tightening slightly. "Didn't expect to wake up." Ethan crossed his arms lightly, leaning against the table. "Most don't," he said. She looked back at him, her eyes sharp again. "But I did." "Yeah," he replied. "You did." Another pause. Then she shifted slightly, wincing just enough for him to notice. He stepped forward instinctively, but stopped himself before getting too close. "You're still weak," he said. "Body's catching up." She ignored that, her focus returning to him. "Why'd you do it?" she asked. The question was direct, no hesitation. Ethan didn't answer right away. He had been asked that before, in different ways, in different situations. But it always came down to the same thing. "Because you were out there," he said simply. She held his gaze, searching for more. "That's it?" "That's enough," he replied. Something in her expression shifted again. Not disbelief, not quite. More like recognition. As if she understood that answer more than she expected to. She nodded once, slowly. "Most would have kept writing," she said. "Most aren't me," Ethan replied. That almost earned a smile. Almost. She adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, her posture straightening despite the fatigue. "I owe you," she said. Ethan shook his head immediately. "No." She frowned, slightly. "You don't even know what I can—" "Doesn't matter," he cut in, his tone firm but not harsh. "You don't owe me anything." The words landed between them, solid and unshaken. She studied him for a long moment, then leaned back slightly, exhaling. "That's not how things usually work," she said. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "I've noticed." Silence settled again, but it felt different now. Less guarded, more curious. She glanced around the small cabin, taking in the details she hadn't fully noticed before. The worn table, the simple shelves, the fire. Everything about it spoke of a life that was steady, but not easy. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "Yeah." "By choice?" He considered that. "Doesn't feel like much of one anymore," he said. That caught her attention. She looked back at him, something thoughtful in her eyes. "It should be," she said quietly. Ethan didn't respond. Not because he disagreed, but because he wasn't used to hearing things put that way. She shifted again, slower this time, more careful. "I need to leave," she said. He frowned slightly. "Not yet." "I don't have time to stay," she replied, "storm or not." "You won't make it far in your condition," he said. "Doesn't matter," she answered, her voice tightening slightly. "It does," he said, stepping closer now, his tone steady. "Out there, it always does." She held his gaze, something stronger rising behind her eyes now. Not anger, determination. "You don't understand," she said. Ethan didn't back down. "Then explain it." The room went still. For a moment it looked like she might refuse, like she would keep whatever it was to herself and walk out anyway. But then, something shifted. Just slightly. She looked away, her jaw tightening before she spoke again. "There's a ranch," she said, "north of here. Big land, too big for most people to handle." Ethan didn't interrupt. She continued, her voice steady but carrying weight now. "It's mine." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Ethan blinked once, then again. "Yours?" he repeated. She nodded. "Inherited it," she said. "And right now, there are people trying to take it." That changed things. Not everything, but enough. Ethan straightened slightly, his attention sharpening. "What kind of people?" She met his gaze again. "The kind who wait for storms," she said quietly. "The kind who think no one's coming back." Understanding settled in slowly. Not surprise, just clarity. Ethan glanced toward the door, toward the land beyond it, then back at her. And you were heading there? Yes. Alone? I didn't have a choice. The answer came without hesitation. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. He looked at her again, really looked this time. Not just as someone he had pulled from the snow, but as someone carrying something bigger than herself. You're not going anywhere today, he said finally. She opened her mouth to argue, but he cut in before she could. Not like this, he added. You won't make it. And if what you're saying is true, you'll need more than just getting there. She held his gaze, tension building again. But this time it wasn't the same as before. This time it felt like two people standing on the edge of the same problem, not opposite sides. After a long moment, she nodded, just once. One day, she said, that's all I can give. Ethan gave a small nod in return. One day's enough to start. She leaned back slightly, the decision settling in. For the first time since she had woken, she looked less like someone ready to run and more like someone willing to stay. Just for now, just long enough. Outside, the storm had left the land covered in silence. But inside that small cabin, something had begun that neither of them had planned. A rescue that was never supposed to be more than survival was turning into something else entirely. Because Ethan hadn't just saved a stranger, he had saved a woman with everything to lose. And before long, he would find himself riding straight into a fight that wasn't his, but one he wouldn't walk away from.